So welcome everyone. My name is Kimberly Huntress Inskeep. I'm the founder of Transit Trekker. Um, and I'm going to before we dive in, I'm going to give you a brief overview of our agenda today here at this webinar for mobility for non-drivers in rural communities and small cities. Um, and I'll talk about its connection to the Week Without Driving and a little bit of context, and then I will introduce our panelists. I am being assisted on Zoom today by Cody, who is in the he's on my upper right corner. And so he'll be pasting links in the chat from time to time. And if you forget to mute yourself and there's a lot of background noise, he may mute you. Just if we need to listen to somebody else. So this webinar is part of the National Week Without Driving, which starts Monday, September 29th and runs through Sunday, October 5th. If you're not familiar with the Week Without Driving, it is a project that started here in Washington State back in 2021. That was part of an effort from the Disability Mobility Initiative at Disability Rights Washington, led by Anna Zebarts, who was going to be here today, but she is double booked because she is in demand. Since that first year, the Week Without Driving has grown from a few dozen elected and community leaders participating around Washington State, but is spread across the US and Canada, and I think even Australia. So the Week Without Driving is an invitation for leaders to go a week without driving themselves as a way to better understand the mobility challenges of the roughly 30% of people who can't drive themselves. And so that includes young people, it includes elders, it includes people with disabilities, people who cannot afford the considerable cost of owning a car, people who can't afford to drive. And so the week is really a way for leaders to understand in practice and not just theory, just how our transportation does, or in many cases, does not serve non-drivers always that well. And the way that I fit in here is that Anna hired me to support some of the work of Disability Mobility Initiative back in 2021. And I've been working on and off with her on it since then. Around that same time, back in 2021, I had been thinking about whether I could write a book about car-free recreation for people like me who can't drive, but who do want to get out and hike and bike or kayak or whatever. Because there's a lot that is doable, but it can take a lot of time to plan to figure out what that is. And so that book is in progress, but in the meantime, I also created a website where I collect resources for car-free recreation, and that is called Transit Trekker. So when I decided to start Transit Trekker and write the book, I had also been hearing in the course of my work with Anna and the Disability Mobility Initiative how non-drivers in rural regions really do have exceptional challenges in getting around. That was a very consistent, message that I heard. And I was thinking, a lot of recreation destinations are in or really close to rural communities and smaller cities. So it seemed like advocating for better transit and mobility in rural communities would also benefit recreation access and be kind of like a win-win, right? And in a way that put communities first. So if you could put the mobility of small communities first, then you open up access for people like me who live in cities. I'm based in Seattle. You open up car-free recreation access for folks like us. And so it's a nice bridging of that rural-urban divide as far as I'm concerned. So I do, when I am talking about car-free recreation, I do also try to always talk about the need to improve rural mobility, transit, safe routes for walking and rolling and biking. And so just to get to this webinar, through the years, the Week Without Driving organizers have really consistently heard when inviting leaders from rural areas and smaller towns to participate in the week, that it's really hard, which is really understandable because of course, there really is a dearth of, frequent transit in some areas. There's often not biking or walking or rolling infrastructure that feels safe. There are lack of sidewalks and some really basic fundamentals are missing. And so it's really understandable that leaders would have a hard time conceiving of how they can participate in the week if they live in a rural area. So this webinar is an effort to invite those leaders to listen to some non-drivers from rural regions, and also come up with ways. We will spend some time at the very end brainstorming some ways that you might be able to participate in a sort of I think Lynn McCarthy is on this call from Hope Link in Snoqualmie Valley here in Washington. And I think the way she put it was like, maybe you could just take like a more digestible bite of the week without driving. So we'll spend a few minutes brainstorming about ways that you all might be able to do that toward the end of the webinar. Technically, we do run until 1:30, but I'm going to try to run a tight ship and try to get us wrapped up by 1:15. That is a little bit of context for the webinar and my connection to the Week Without Driving. I'm going to ask Cody right now if you can go ahead and paste links to the Week Without Driving website in the chat, and also the transit tracker link in the chat, and my email address in the chat if anybody wants to copy those now. I will email you all after the meeting and share links and whatnot, but for those of you who want to take a peek now. Before I get to introducing our panelists, I would like attendees to put your location in the chat, like your city, your county, your state, your organization if you're with one, and what your role is. And so take a minute to put that in the chat, and I will read those out in a minute. An important, thank you, Cody. An important note is that please do not use the chat if someone else is speaking, because for panelists who are blind or low vision and might be using screen readers, the chat conflicts with their ability to hear others talking. It's sort of like talking over somebody. So unless I explicitly ask you to use the chat today, just like hold your questions or take notes on your desktop or something, and then pop them in during our question period later. And so we're getting some folks putting their regions in the chat. And so we have a couple of folks from Jefferson Transit, a familiar face, the general manager, Nicole Gauthier, and their marketing and outreach manager, whose name just slipped away from my chat, Kelly Olson. We have Deborah from Port Townsend also. We have Kevin from Bainbridge Island by way of Anchorage, Alaska. We have Tara Goddard from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She is a transportation, she studies transportation safety for non-drivers, transit, and paratransit evacuation. Charles Hamilton from All Aboard Washington, based in Seattle. We have Sam Pearson, Pennsylvania Downtown Center, WalkWorks program. She works statewide. They work statewide and live in a small town in rural central Pennsylvania. So we have folks from all over the country. So that is always great to hear.
Kimberly, we got a raised hand. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, sure.
You saw that.
Lynn.
Yeah, hi. I'm driving, so I just wanted to let you know, yes, Lynn McCarthy from HopeLink is here, and to off camera and muted because I'm driving.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And HopeLink is based in Snoqualmie Valley here in Washington State. So we are sort of coast to coast with our attendees. While our panelists are from Washington State, I do think that folks outside Washington will still find that non-drivers around the country, the rural regions around the country and small cities do have a lot in common. So I'm confident that hearing from these non-drivers will be valuable for you all. And I know that some folks outside of Washington, you might not be familiar with our geography. So I made a map highlighting where our panelists are from, and I'll show that after they introduce themselves. So let's see. I just want to double check. We do have one of our panelists is, she had a medical appointment, and so I think she might be running a little bit late, but we will start introducing our other three panelists who are here. And we will start with Judy and go clockwise. And so Judy, if you could tell us your name, where you live and work, and the nature of your non-driver status. Tell us how you get around and kind of what the mobility situation is like in your community.
Okay, thank you very much for having me on the panel. My name is Judy Jones. I am blind and I live in Skagit County in Cedar Woolley. I'm currently serving as the chair for the Skagit Transit Community Advisory Committee. And the way I get around is, anyway, there's mass transit, but basically what I do is, being blind, I can use paratransit plus fixed route. What's mostly been happening here is I've been using a lot of paratransit in the local area and then use the fixed route for the connectors and other bus transportation. And I also use Amtrak. Um, and with Skagit County, we have one of the smaller agencies, and I'm really excited to report that our CEO has just been asked to be on the board of, I think it's called the Bus Coalition. I didn't write it down, but it's a coalition of smaller transit agencies. She's very excited about that. Since she's been here since 2023, she's endorsed the Week Without Driving, which is really great. This year we have the chair of our Skagit Transit Board who's going to be participating in the Week Without Driving. He talked about it this morning on the board meeting before I got here. Now, as far, we are a smaller agency. They do really try to stress quality of service. And with the resources they have, they really try to give it their all. One of the things that's happening in our area is we have a pilot microtransit uh, program going on in northwest Skagit County. We're right in the fat middle of our 5-year, our transit plan. We're in a regional transit plan with a couple of other counties here in the area, Island and Whatcom. And then there's the plan development. And oh my goodness, our committee has had lots of homework, lots of things to look. So it's been a busy year for us. I think as a committee, we're not really going after a particular Week Without Driving activity because we've just been so loaded with plans and all that entails with the homework. One of the things in our changing subject here, Skagit Transit, that you see all the time in surveys is number one, people want to have more service, more frequent service in some areas, and it seems like everybody wants later service. And on the weekdays, the service runs. It shuts down at 9 o'clock, so therefore the routes have to be dropping off people at 8 p.m. and so forth. On the weekends, it's even earlier. And so we are all saying, please, 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 whenever you can do it, increase the hours. But that's enough about Skagit Transit and what I'm doing. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Great. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Now we're going to go down to, well, I say down because lives southwest, southwest of Judy. So Jim, introduce yourself and tell us about you and where you live and the mobility situation there.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim. Thank you for having me. I do live in Moxie, Washington. It's a little town in central Washington state. I'm about 6 miles outside of Yakima, Washington, which is a city of about 100,000. And they do have public transit available there. The challenges that I face being legally blind are getting from Moxie, which is a small town, to Yakima. Once I can get to Yakima, then I utilize public transit to get anywhere really in the world. So I can get to an airport or a bus or a train. So the significant challenge I face, and it's a daily planning challenge, is getting from Moxie to Yakima. And that's for everything from medical to necessities, grocery stores, to entertainment, church, anything like that. I've got to make that 6 mile journey. So that to me is the biggest challenge. And I really appreciate the Week Without Driving because as I said, I'm legally blind, fairly new to it. It's been about 3 years. And until I lost my sight, I knew what blindness was, but I didn't really appreciate it for the challenges that blind individuals face. And it's opened my eyes, so to speak, to those challenges. And they're not unique to blind individuals. They're challenges that a lot of disabled individuals face. And then also just those folks who choose not to drive for whatever reason, as Kimberly stated a little earlier, could be economic, could be just by choice. They're all challenges that we face being non-drivers, and it is 30% of the population. So it's a large population that face these challenges. Um, but until you experience it, you don't really understand it. So I encourage everybody to participate in the Week Without Driving to get that unique perspective. I get around. Generally, I have to get a ride from a family member or a friend to Yakima, and then from there I can venture out on my own. Things such as dial a ride, paratransit, they don't come out to my community, and you have to live within, I believe it's a mile and a half from from public transportation for them to come and pick you up. So that takes me out of that of them being an option for me. But as I said, once I get that 6 mile trek, which I would even consider walking, but there's no sidewalks, there's no pathways or anything like that to safely get to Yakima. So again, it's a challenge that I face on a daily basis, and I encourage anyone who lives in a rural community who is a driver to take that Week Without Driving challenge and really see what it's like and get an appreciation for it and for what it is that we face every day.
Great, thank you, Jim. All right, now, normally I would ask Sarah Habby to go next, but again, she is running a little late today, and she lives down in Longview, down in southwestern Washington, which is a smaller city on the kind of on the Columbia River. And so we'll have her introduce herself later, and so we will go up to now we'll go up to John. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your community and the mobility situation there.
Yes, my name is John Frasco. I live in Port Townsend, Washington, which is on the technically it's on the Quimper Peninsula, which is part of the Olympic Peninsula. So we are separated from Seattle by Puget Sound. I moved here in 2013. I lived most of my life in Olympia, Washington, which is about 100 miles south of here. But one of my criteria, when I was just starting to use a walker when I moved here, my left leg was impaired from a traumatic brain injury. And fortunately, one of my criteria for selecting a home to buy was to be on the bus line. And fortunately, I found a condominium that meets that criteria. And then about 3 years after I moved here, my right leg started giving me issues. And I was diagnosed with ALS. So now both of my legs are impaired, and I'm in a power wheelchair 24/7. So I stopped driving in 2016 when I started having the issues with my right leg. So I haven't driven anything but a wheelchair for about 8 years now. And after I moved here, I learned that paratransit service, we call it dial a ride here in Jefferson County, was available. So I used that for going to local medical appointments and places that they scheduled buses don't service. But I use the scheduled buses to do my grocery shopping and to go to the downtown area of Port Townsend and things like that. And it's been a good thing. Now, when I when I need to go to Seattle for medical purposes, I actually have three options. The most recent option, which I used most recently, is a bus that we have that goes directly to Kingston, Washington, and then the Kingston's in Kitsap County, and it has a fast ferry that is passenger only that goes over to the main ferry terminal in Seattle, and then from there I can use wheelchair accessible taxis to get to my appointment. My other option for getting to Seattle is a service called Dungeness Transit, and that actually takes me all the way to Seattle. It takes me across on the ferry and then up to the area where most of the hospitals are. It stops at the train station and things. And then my other option is to use another Jefferson Transit service that connects to a Kitsap Transit bus that then takes me to the Bainbridge ferry that can take me over to Seattle. So all those work, and I'm very grateful for having that available. I failed to mention that, and I should have, knowing there are people with vision problem. I am an older male with a gray beard, a bald head. My pronouns are he, him. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thanks for that reminder of describing ourselves. I did not. I'm a middle-aged woman with longish graying red hair and glasses, and my pronouns are she, her. Thank you for all those introductions. I'm going to just briefly share my screen so that you all can see. Cody, is that sharing properly? Is that?
Yep, I see it.
Okay, great, excellent. So probably most people are familiar with Seattle, which is there kind of in the on the left center side of the map. And so Judy is up here sort of northwest of Seattle in Sedro-Woolley, east of Mount Vernon, which is a stop on Amtrak. And Jim is down here in Moxie, outside of Yakima. And Lisa actually is Sarah. I made a mistake. Who hasn't joined us yet, is Longview is down here, kind of. Portland is cut off in this map, but it's at the very bottom, right below Vancouver, Washington. So she's down in the southwest corner of the state. And then John, who you just heard from, is up here in Port Townsend. And Port Townsend's at the very tip. I don't know if you can see my little plus sign, but Port Townsend's at the very tip of that more slender peninsula up there. So if you are not from Washington, or even if you are from Washington and aren't familiar with some of these communities, that should give you a little orientation. And next, I would love to ask Judy to share a story or anecdote, if you can, that sort of highlights one of your most typical challenges that you face getting around your community or anywhere else, getting beyond your community. Something that might, help folks understand a sort of typical experience for you.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I'd be glad to. As far as mass transit goes, what we have always done, my husband is also blind, and just a little bit of a background, we've been very independent, and we were both military brats, so we're used to moving around, used to planning, used to, having grown up that way. And actually, we met when we were military brats. But having said all that, the way we approach mass transit and what we do is we just go after what we need. And whenever we have bought homes or needed to move with Chris's job or anything like that, the first thing we've done is, you got to plan this strategically when you don't drive. First thing we've done is we said, okay, what's this transit look like in this county, in this area, where we're going to be? And of course, we're like, okay, can we walk to what we need to get to? Can we take buses what we need to get to? And our first call invariably when we're looking when we've looked at prospective places to live, is contacting that agency and just finding out. So it's having just being primed to do that in life. We have never lacked a way to be able to get where we need to go, because we've always planned that, which is really a blessing. And then I think there was one time when we were this was a long time ago. This was horrible, but this is actually when we were going to be buying a house. And it was several years ago. We were living down in Florida, and we were in a bedroom community of Orlando, Florida, in the next county. And so we thought, oh, this house is great. We're going to take it. And our realtor, we were asking her about the intersections. What are they like? And she goes, oh yeah, they're lighted intersections, and there's sets of lights. You ought to be good to go. So we're like, okay, that's great. What turned out is the night before closing, we were up there in the evening because we had to go at night because we both worked. And so she took us up there to just, one more check over the house. And then a walkthrough at the intersection, and we discovered that the intersection actually was an intersection that jogged for half a block. So there were two sets of double lights. And of course, being a driver, she didn't think about that for us trying to cross it. But in this half a block, across the street was a 7-Eleven where people would just pull out and go into the street. Well, as a blind person, when you're wanting to cross with your side traffic, with that jog, we had no idea whether we were getting side traffic within that jog or whether we were getting direct traffic in front of us where we shouldn't cross. So that we're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And so we're like, you know what? We can't take the house. And this was the night before we were supposed to close. So we're like, oh no, it just seemed really traumatic at the time. But the people that we had made the offer to were very understanding, and we lived to tell the story, and we have purchased houses since then with no problems. But you really, if anybody's going to be making a move or doing anything, really try to walk through the place where you're going to go, if you're a blind person, make sure that you can walk and navigate those intersections. But that was our horror story with that. And so, but now, fast forwarding, we're not really having any problems with mass transit as far we both use white canes and go very efficiently and independently wherever we want to go with that cane. We travel safely. And what I would say too is, again, the only wish that we had was later service hours.
Great. Thank you so much, Judy. I think that I remember hearing that story about the housing, I think when we were working on the transportation for everyone's story map. And it really I know I've lived in cities and partly because I drive. And so that, but I know your example was in Florida and maybe not such a rural area, but I think that,
No.
Imagine if you can extend that to a rural area where there's probably less traffic light infrastructure and things like that. I think people can really understand how transit access and mobility access plays into really important aspects of life. And I know John mentioned, you have to take, I think it's at least 3 buses to get to medical appointments in Seattle if you need to access care here instead of where you are. So really good examples of connecting to other, really important issues. So thank you, Judy.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim, can you tell us, maybe a story that does highlight, a typical challenge that you face in getting around your community?
Sure. Again, I'm fairly new to being blind, so I started learning different things that Judy and John are, they're kind of old pros at now, it sounds. But I'm now looking at selling my home in Moxie and purchasing a home in Yakima. And one of the reasons for that is the lack of transit options for me currently. I am the president of Yakima Valley Council of the Blind. And with that brings a lot of responsibilities and a lot of physical engagements that I have to make, which are proving to be challenging for transportation, transportation being the reason. One example is we have a Friday blind bowling event every Friday in Yakima. And again, I have to get into Yakima just to get to any type of public transportation. So um, everything that I do now has to be planned out days in advance, usually weeks in advance. That's one thing I've noticed is as a blind person, you've got to be super organized and plan everything out and be on a schedule. Fortunately, I am former military, so that wasn't the easy part. Now, other folks who I depend on, maybe not so much. So, I am at the mercy of their schedules, understandably, until I can get into Yakima. But so I've got that weekly commitment there. That's one commitment for the blind bowling. Now, a lot of times they may want to have lunch after the fact, just an unplanned, spontaneous thing, which is fine once I'm there, but getting home sometimes can be a challenge. We do now also have Uber, which is pretty expensive for me. So now I have to weigh the costs, and the cost being it's going to be a $40 ride home if I choose to do something outside of my schedule. So that is a definite consideration. So again, I'm looking for a home that in Yakima that is close to a public transportation avenue one way or another, because like I said, once I can get to Yakima, I can grab a bus or an Uber or walk. I do use a white cane and I get around very well with that. If I can get to an airport, even better, because then I know that I can go anywhere. Um, I travel to Louisiana on a regular basis to see my daughter and grandchildren there, and to Iowa to see my son and grandson there. But inevitably, the biggest challenge is that 6 miles that has no public transportation at this point. And it does affect pretty much every aspect of my life because it limits what I can do just daily. It limits my ability to be spontaneous at all. Um, and it really just hinders everything that I can do.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Yeah, I am a very independent person and have been since I was younger. And even like, yeah, having to ask for a ride, and then like somebody wants to do some impromptu thing and you have plans and yeah, it can be, um, especially as an adult, like you want to
I was going to
control your
say,
own
especially
time.
as a 52-year-old man, to say, well, let me just double check and see if I can do that. I'm not sure. Yeah,
All right, well, thank you.
yeah.
Um, John, can you tell us a story that sort of highlights one typical challenge that you face getting around your community or even, outside your community?
Okay, well, I failed to mention that I'm on the board of the Accessible Community Advisory Committee, which is part of the Department of Health here in Jefferson County. I'm also a member of or board member of the what we call the DASH project, which stands for Disability Awareness Starts Here. And we work with city governments and the city government, the county, and businesses where there are issues that are brought to our attention that with regard to accessibility. When I first moved here and was still using a walker, I had to get over to the hospital for a medical appointment.
Oh dear, Your video froze, John, and you're muted again. So let me. See if we can unmute him.
Okay, it looks like it looks like I'm unmuted again. Okay.
Yeah, you dropped out for a minute. So I think that you cut out for me when you started talking about the last time or one time you tried to go to the hospital.
Okay, yeah, and I was using, I didn't know about the dial ride service, our paratransit. So I had taken the scheduled bus, and due to the topography of there's a very long ADA ramp from the bus stop down to the level where the main entrance to the hospital is. And it's so long that it has a switchback. And unfortunately, when I was at the top of the ramp, we had a downpour of rain, and the ramp kind of turned into a river. And it was very frightening because I thought I was going to fall. Well, when I got my composure and got down and got into the lobby, one of the first people I ran into was the CEO of the hospital, who happened to be a man that I had worked with in Olympia. I worked for a hospital in Olympia, and I told him what had happened, and he said, "Well, John, you need to sign up for Dial-A-Ride because they'll take you around to." And the other issue was that my appointment was on the far side of the hospital, and the Dial-A-Ride buses can go around and drop me off right there. So anyway, that was just one interesting thing that fortunately introduced me to the paratransit availability. I also failed to mention that I'm on the I was recruited to be a member of the transit advisory group to give representation to people with disabilities. Let me bring up. Let's see. I guess one of the main challenges is that if there's a need for last minute transportation or transportation, particularly on Sundays when the buses do not run and the paratransit is not available. We don't have wheelchair accessible taxi service here in Port Townsend, and we don't have a local place where wheelchair accessible vans can be rented. So I'm pretty much stuck to my very very local area when transit is not running. But I have to say transit has been a great benefit to me, and I am very happy to be able to use that service. I think that pretty much covers the things that I wanted to say there. So
great, thank you. Thank you very much. And I had a comment about something you said, but I forgot it. So if I remember it later, I will bring it up. I think just like general awareness. Like I've been a transit reliant person my entire adult life, and like there's still things that I'm learning about transit that, like, I mean, I there's a lot more transit service in Seattle where I live, but even so, it's like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. And so learning that, you weren't aware of DART for a while. It would be like, imagine somebody not knowing that like a freeway existed, right? That just wouldn't happen because because for a lot of reasons. But anyway, just something to think about there. So let's go back to Judy now. And Judy, if you could change one thing in your community in terms of mobility, just public infrastructure or service or whatever, what would be the most impactful, meaningful improvement for your quality of life?
On the infrastructure, You know, the infrastructure itself doesn't we don't, like as far as blind people, if you're just a plain old blind, generic blind person like myself, uh, there aren't really physical barriers that bother us, that that I can think of. But one of the things I will say, and it doesn't have to do so much with mass transit, but it does have to do with the way a blind person navigates the streets and the intersections, is quiet cars. Just imagine if you were a driver having to watch out for not only regular traffic, but translucent vehicles, meaning that they're partial, you can halfway see through them, but maybe not. But for us, that's the best comparison I can think of for quiet cars, because you kind of have to listen for them coming up in the traffic. You have to be aware they're there, and you want to stay safe when you're using a cane. And also, the other thing is right on reds have gotten so bad now, the right on red traffic, that many times you can miss a light. That when you have the traffic that you've got your parallel traffic to cross with. There's so many right on red traffic vehicles that you lose your light, and that can happen over and over and over again, depending on how busy the intersection is. So I guess you would say that those are uh, moving barriers
Yeah, I mean, I
to
think that
trying to get to
definitely
where you
counts
want
as
to go.
infrastructure. That definitely counts as infrastructure. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So there you go. All right.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that Seattle has started to ban more right turns on reds. And I, even as a sighted person, trying to anticipate whether somebody's actually going to
Mm-hmm.
can be really, it can be fraught a lot of the time. So.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, okay. So Jim, what is like one change to infrastructure or service in the broadest sense in your community that would be most meaningful for your mobility?
Oh, that one for me is really easy. It would simply to add some sort of a shuttle service or a bus out to my community that would take us to Yakima. Um, that would be so helpful. Um, and I do have a couple of members in Yakima Valley Council of the Blind who also live in Moxie, so I do know that we do have multiple blind individuals that live here in this community who would benefit greatly by having a some sort of a public transit venue from Moxie into Yakima. It would open the doors to so many more options for us. Um, that would be the single biggest um, change I would make. Um, Definitely.
Great, thank you. John, how about you? Back to you already. You're muted. You gotta unmute yourself.
There we
go.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Okay. As a board member of the Disability Awareness Starts Here, I have and as a wheelchair user, I have certainly learned how important it is for sidewalks to be in good condition, that for there to be the curb cuts or ramps. And an example for me is that I live 2 blocks from our farmers market location, and the sidewalks were so bad between my home and the, uh, the farmers market that I had to cross the the, the arterial that I live on, go the 2 blocks, and then cross it again to get to the farmers market. Well, when the city was working on getting grant money to repair those sidewalks, I wrote a letter describing my situation, and our director of public works has thanked me a couple times for that letter that helped him to get the grant money to make that, and now that sidewalk is repaired. And just recently we had In the other direction, which I don't need to go very often, there's a sidewalk that needs to be bad, or that needs to be repaired because it's so bad. And I'm happy to say that in order the streets also with the potholes, in order to get the grant money from the state to repair the street, the state requires that the sidewalks be made ADA accessible. So, but I think my main point is how important good sidewalks are for everyone, and I always like to remind people that those things that help us, those of us who are disabled, help everyone. The curb cuts help people pushing strollers and so forth. So it's an important for everyone. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. All right, back to Judy. We are going to invite everybody at this webinar to participate in the Week Without Driving. But what is one thing that you would most like folks on this call to come away from today understanding, or seeking to learn more about? Like, how should people, other than participating in the Week Without Driving, how do you think that leaders, community leaders, and transportation and planning professionals and informal community leaders can learn more about what non-drivers, what their challenges and needs really are?
Okay, and thank you for that question. Yes, I think one of the things that non-drivers can do, whether it's in a coalition or whether it's in a community advisory committee like ours, however it is, if you can raise the profile of your transit agency with your community, I think that's very important. And this is one thing that we are really working hard at. There are people in our county now who are unaware even that there is a transit, that there is mass transit in our community. And it means, to me, that means that different or better they work very hard at marketing. They do a lot of really good things, but something different has to happen to raise the profile of the agency. The community, I think the end game is for the community to have buy-in to the agency. You want your community to be able to really support you. And one of the examples that I can think of is if you come to a intersection in the road, if your agency needs budget help, if you're trying to get some more money for a budget, maybe you've got a percentage of a sales tax that you are allowed to ask for within your county. And if your county knows who you are, buys into the transit that you have, likes the system, interacts with the agency as well as taking the buses, then when something like this comes up on a, say, for instance, a ballot measure, then they're going to go, oh, yeah, we like our transit system, sure. And then you would get it passed and therefore. But if your community doesn't know who you are, doesn't know anything about the agency or very little bit about the agency, then that's kind of an uphill battle. And that's just one example. But I do believe that mass transit needs to have a high profile within the community.
Great, thank you. Jim, what would you like your leaders in your community or folks on this call to seek more, to learn more about in terms of non-drivers' needs and experiences?
I think what I would like, or what I think would be great for folks to take away from this would be appreciation and maybe some empathy for what the challenges we face. And I'm not speaking strictly just blind individuals, but just disabled in general. The specific challenges, because it's one thing to hear and know it, but it's another thing to experience it. as I said, I'm newly blind, so these experiences that I'm having now are they're new. They're new to me. These challenges are new. They're not challenges that I was unaware of, but I didn't really have an appreciation for it until faced with them personally. Um, a, an example of, I guess, what I mean is we do a fundraiser called Dinner in the Dark, and that's where we have folks come out and have dinner with us blindfolded. So now they can experience what it's like to actually eat a meal, which is fairly simple when you think about it. Um, Eat a meal, drink, your drink while blindfolded. And it's not that they weren't aware of this challenge, but until they faced it, firsthand and experienced what it was like to not be able to see your food on your plate, and then if it actually have to say, okay, um, this portion is at 9 o'clock and this portion is at 12 o'clock. And I'm going to keep my drink at 12 o'clock so I don't knock it over and spill it. So they walk away from that with a newfound appreciation and understanding of what those challenges really are, you know. And so I would challenge those on this call to really participate in the week without driving personally, so that way you would be more aware and empathetic, appreciate the challenges that we do face, um, because you probably are aware of them, but until you experience it firsthand, you may not really be aware of what that challenge is in your everyday life. So I would encourage you to have some appointments during this week without driving and having, really see what it's like to try and you know maneuver your life without being able to drive. And then at that point, you really would see what's, some of the things that we're talking about as our challenges, and really see them as for what they are.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. And so I've heard raising the profile of transit agencies so folks are aware of and appreciate those transit agencies, and more empathy for folks who are non-drivers. John, what would you ask folks on this call to come away from, or to seek more understanding of? And remember to unmute yourself first.
Okay, now you can hear me. What's happened is my unmute thing is covered up by where it says meeting being recorded.
Very relatable.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
And anyway, I once again I certainly want to emphasize the importance of the sidewalk infrastructure. But an example of something that we did here in Port Townsend was we had a training session for the vendors at our farmers market to talk about to them about recognizing people with disabilities that are not as obvious as obviously my disability, being in a wheelchair, is pretty obvious, but it's people who are legally blind, who may not use a white cane, people who have hearing issues, and being as aware as possible of how to give better service to those people. But something that we did, another thing that we did was we had a presentation one afternoon where Anna Zivart came and talked to us about her book. And the title of her book is "When Driving is Not an Option," and it very well lays out the issues that we face, those of us who are non-drivers face. So I would certainly recommend her book to anyone who is on this call who may. And then the other thing that I do is at that meeting, Anna gave me a week without driving hat, and I regularly wear that to the farmers market and to other events that I go to, and it's a very good conversation thing that gives me the opportunity to talk to people about why we have the week without driving and what some of the issues are. So once again, please read Anna's book, the When Driving is Not an Option, and make your community as aware as possible of what the issues are.
Great. Thank you so much, John. I just cut and paste into the chat Anna's website, which features her book, so you can check that out. And again, I'll include that when I send a follow-up email after the meeting today. So now we're going to pivot a little bit, and if our meeting attendees have any questions for our panelists, what I would love for you to do is let's start by putting your questions in the chat, and then I'll ask you. I'll use the chat to ask question to, I'll ask you to ask the question to everybody. Yeah, so any questions for our panelists, just put those in the chat there. And I will call on you to ask the question out loud. Okay. All right. I am not seeing any questions. I'm going to give it another minute, but the next thing on my agenda, our agenda, is to actually brainstorm a little bit about, how can you participate in the week without driving if you do live in one of these rural regions that has less, fewer safe routes for cycling or, walking or rolling or transit service that, in some communities, like, there is transit service and it's pretty okay, 6 days a week. And then there's nothing on Sunday. Like, I think that's John's situation in Port Townsend. I think there's no Sunday service. So it could be really, really challenging for folks to do that. So start thinking about, like, is there a way you could take a little bite of the week without driving and do a day or go to an event without driving or something like that. And then we'll share that in a moment. But we actually do have a question for our panelists, which is from Nicole Gauthier at Jefferson Transit Authority. She is the general manager. Nicole, why don't you come off mute and go ahead and ask folks your question, and we'll start with Judy answering. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nicole Gauthier. I'll do a description. I'm middle-aged woman, gray hair. I like to think not all gray, but a little bit gray. And again, general manager of Jefferson Transit Authority in Port Townsend. Thank you to all the panelists for your time. I appreciate that. My question would be, if you could, what would one kind of aspect or issue that you would want to raise? Like, if you had the opportunity to talk to a general manager in your area, what is one thing you would want them to know about the difficulties that you face utilizing the transit agency that they manage? And especially to John, be honest. I know you're being nice, I think, because I'm here, but be honest, because I really am kind of interested in.
Well, let's start with John then instead of Judy for this one, since Nicole asked directly.
Okay, well, Nicole, I'm certainly glad you're here. I was pleased to get your email letting members of the Transit Advisory Group and the board know about this meeting. But I've been honest. I think my service with Jefferson Transit has been excellent. Other than, as I said, the the lack of service on Sunday. I and one of the things that where I particularly miss the service on Sundays is when there's an event at Fort Worden. And even though Fort Worden is within the range of my wheelchair, the roads to get there don't have sidewalks, and I just would be frightened
And
to try
John,
and ride.
sorry to interrupt, but can you explain to folks who aren't familiar with Fort Worden?
Oh, okay. Yeah, Fort Worden is a beautiful state park that formerly was a military. There were 3 military bases that guarded the entrance to Puget Sound, and they've all fortunately are now beautiful parks for us to enjoy.
And very popular too.
So anyway, that's what comes to mind for me is when I have to miss an event like that. But honestly, now that we have the direct transit to the Kitsap fast ferry, that's been a real bonus. And and hopefully that's going to be utilized more and more, and maybe we can make it even more often. And then, of course, we're having our schedule change later on this month, so it'll be interesting to adapt to that.
All right, great, thank you. Let's go to Judy. And Judy, what is the one thing you would want every general manager of a transit agency to know about the challenges of using public transit?
Okay, thank you. Yes. Well, one thing I can say is our CEO here of Skagit Transit has been in place since 2023, and she has been a great champion of the Community Advisory Committee. Her name is Crystal Stidham, and she got a lot of things happening for us that it was taking a lot of nagging on my part and a lot of slow, like sloth speed stuff with Skagit Transit at that time. But she has been really good to the CAC. She stepped in when we did not have any or very few Skagit transit representation according to our bylaws on the CAC. She stepped in when we did not have a liaison. So she's really championed us, and we appreciate her and what she's done a lot. So having said that, anything that has come up regarding routes or issue or online presence for the CAC, the Facebook page that needs to really be, I'm talking raising profiles, social media for Skagit Transit, things like that. She's championed that. I talked with her about making rider guides accessible according to the latest internet accessibility, web accessibility standards, and she has had the in-house IT that they had at the time do that. So they're just things that she has done, and she continues to have an open door policy for anyone who would like to speak and talk to her about issues.
Great, thank you, Jim.
For me, it would really just be lack of options in the communities outside that rely upon Yakima for everything. There are several smaller communities that are outside of Yakima that, for medical, groceries, and entertainment, recreation, they depend on Yakima, but there's no access to Yakima that is a public transit option. So I think that's what I would want them to know, the general manager of Yakima's transit system, that the communities that depend upon Yakima, we just don't have access to them on public transit. And that if they hear that, I would be greatly appreciative.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nicole, for that question too. And thanks for being here. So yeah, I don't see any more questions. So I do want to ask folks if you've had a chance to think about, you know, ways that you can participate, engage with the Week Without Driving from those rural or smaller city communities. And I gave the example, I think Lynn had to drop off the call, but Lynn from Hope Link in Snoqualmie Valley here in King County I think she had initially tried to organize a lunch without driving, where she was going to ask leaders from the Snoqualmie Valley to come to lunch. So just really taking one part of the day that week. And so feel free to go ahead and raise your hand. We'll do this a little differently. Use the React button to raise your hand if you have a suggestion for how you might be thinking about participating in the Week Without Driving in a sort of more adapted way. I can also share a couple of suggestions that I have been thinking of. I will also, it's kind of a long document, but Judy worked with some folks and put together some potential activities for the Week Without Driving. And I'll share that in an email after, because it is quite a long list. So I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I do want to challenge folks to think about a couple of possibilities. One thing, and I'm going to suggest these, and I will say I am available that week to be a sort of like, you can call me up or email me and get on a Zoom or get on the phone, and we can talk about all of these things. But can you pick a day and see what it would really be like, what it would take in terms of time and planning and money and attention to do all of the things that you would normally be doing on that day. Say a Wednesday, maybe you have kids who have to get to soccer practice, or maybe you have an aging parent that you have to take care of or go visit somewhere. Maybe that's the day that you have to get groceries, and how are you going to do that when the bus only comes every 90 minutes and you have frozen food that you need to make sure it gets into a freezer? So, maybe it's one event that you pick and you record all of the ways you have to think differently about getting around. And note if you have extra costs, like if you take Uber or Lyft instead of because there's not transit available, things like that. So maybe pick an event or a day, and feel free to check in with me. I'll give you my contact information. I can help you plan how to get around. If you're not completely sure, I can sort of be your coach for figuring out transit and walking and rolling information in your community. Although I live in Seattle, I do get around pretty well in the state, and so I do know transit systems. I'm going to call on Judy because she's raising her hand. So come off mute and tell us what. Yes, Judy.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I had a couple of windows I had to go through to get that. All right, so one of the things I was thinking of is that can be done that really simply is the week without the lunch without driving was a really good idea. That was one that our transit agency was interested in helping. And one of the things when I had talked about Week Without Driving to the board, the transit board and other people, I've just said, it's like giving up your car keys, just whatever you do, just give up your car keys for that interval of time. And it doesn't matter what kind of transportation you take, you could take a bus, ride a bike, ride a horse, whatever you want to do, but just give up those car keys. And I think that's actually what kind of inspired our Commissioner Browning to try to participate in the Week Without Driving. He's not going to be doing the whole week, but he's going to be doing a part of it. So Skagit Transit is coming alongside of him to help him get him the information he needs in order to take the buses he needs. One of the things that I also asked the board is, and other people as well, is say, okay, using the rider guide, and they are on the Skagit Transit website, and you can get them in print. But I've said, okay, in the typical day of your life, get one of those rider guides and figure out how you would do what you would do taking a bus. And it was a real wake up call for our CEO because she lives over in Anacortes, and she's like, oh my goodness, I have to it would take me 2 hours to get into town to do this and that. But it's getting that awareness to the people who are the decision makers and in the county that it really helps to get them to know what non-drivers face and what they can do about it.
Thank you. That's such a really good point. And that, that's one thing you can do is, maybe you just keep a log of what it would take. Maybe you go ahead and drive yourself, but you take a log of, how much time would it take to plan all the trips that you had to do? How much would it cost? Would you have to call in favors to get rides from folks who you normally don't have to ask for rides? And just tracking that sort of, those sorts of things, the time and attention required to be a non-driver in a more rural region, I think can be one way that folks engage. So thank you so much, Judy, for that question. Samantha Pearson.
Yeah, I have actually mentioned this on a previous Week Without Driving webinar, but just like Judy was just saying, using a rider guide, not everyone has transit and rider guides. But you can also use Google Maps and toggle between driving, walking, biking, and transit. And sometimes you click on transit and it says, I'm sorry, there are no routes. Or sometimes you click on transit and what would be, say you have to do a 2-hour drive, it would be like, 9 hours and 3 buses, right? So you can actually put those next to each other, take a screenshot of that opportunity cost or, just the hassle. Obviously, to be honest, it should be said that the Google Transit directions are not all that dependable. So, I think it's actually, this is a good use for them, just to give a general sense of what the options might be.
May I interject something in here about the Google? This is Judy.
Go for it.
Okay, so in the Google Map app on your phone or wherever it is, if you go down all the way to the bottom and you want to get into accessibility, and then you can go down, and there is a place where you can check the box for walking to get detailed walking information. So and like for audio. So that would be a box you could check that will help. Yeah, Google doesn't have a look around feature, unfortunately, where you can just say, oh, okay, where am I? What's the street sign, like for us blind travelers. But that feature that it does have that you can check is helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you, Samantha, for that suggestion. That's a really good, concise way, for lack of a better word, that folks could get a handle on what the actual time commitment is. Jim.
Oh, yes. So I totally agree with everything that was being said there. I did want to say that on the Google Maps, I think it would be great if people would utilize that, because even though it is not 100%, that is a real world problem that we face when we are non-drivers. So that is a tool that we depend on, but that is an example of a challenge that we have on a daily basis, that is a real world thing. And I would encourage those who are going to participate in the Week Without Driving that they do something, that it's something, for example, go to work. Okay, something as basic as your daily job, and include that in your non-driving experience, because that's something, that you would do every day and not even think about. But now you're facing some challenges, and it's like, wow, I'm just trying to get to work. And I would encourage you to experience that. It's one thing to try it on something fun that really doesn't matter, but it's another thing to do it on something that is critical to your daily, your existence.
Yep. Thank you so much, Jim. Well, it is 1:17 and I did want to try to wrap up by 1:15. So I do want to bring everything to a close. Panelists, just a reminder to please stay on for a minute so I can say thanks and we can make sure that we are in touch after the webinar. But for everybody else who joined us today and took time out of your workday or just took time out of whatever else you have going on today, thanks so much for attending. And you will get a follow-up email. We will be inviting you to participate in the Week Without Driving. I will share links for everything that we've mentioned here. Just, yeah, thank you again for joining us and take care. Bye-bye. Thanks.